In this video, I'm going to discuss how to calculate the flexible overhead budget at budgeted production of 65%, 75%, and 85%. I'm just going to show how to do the calculations and get you started, and then you should be able to do the rest. The first thing we want to look at is the required information here, and it gives some of the direct materials and the direct labor amounts that's needed for calculating the total cost of production of the product, but our main focus right here will be on the overhead and how it's allocated. And we can see right here that it is allocated as a component of the direct labor hour. So there's multiple different ways that overhead can be allocated. It can be allocated based upon machine hours. It could be allocated based upon units. It could be allocated based upon, in this case, direct labor hours. So the direct labor hours to produce one item, in this case, is 1.9 hours. They've already done the calculation for us, and they've got an overhead rate of $18.50. So let's take a look, and this is our budgeted information, and that's been transferred over here to our calculations. Now, this first number, the 15,000, that's of course, if we take the total capacity, it tells us the total capacity is 20,000 units. So we take 20,000 units, and if we multiply it by 75%, which should be 0.75 if you change it to a decimal. Okay, so you get 20,000 and you multiply it by 0.75, that gets us the 15,000 units. So that tells us the number of units here at 75% capacity. The rest of the math has been done. If you take the 20,000 units and multiply it by 0.65, that gives you 13,000 units. And if you multiply that 20,000 units of the maximum capacity times 85%, which is 0.85, that gives you 17,000 units. So let's look at our calculations here. So we'll start by figuring out, based upon our budgeted amount of 75% capacity, how much our variable amount per unit, variable amount of indirect labor, indirect materials, power, and maintenance is. So we've got, first of all, let's look at indirect labor. Indirect labor costs $75,000 at the 75% capacity. Our number of units, because we want to figure out our variable cost per unit, not per hour, because we have already calculated it based upon the direct labor hours per unit. That's already been done for us. So we know it's 75,000. We want to divide it by the number of units, in this case, the 15,000 units. So if we take 75,000 and we divide it by the 15,000 units, that gives us $5 even per unit for our indirect labor. So we can go ahead and fill that in here, 5.00. We go to the next thing, is the indirect materials, and we see that that's $15,000 for indirect materials. We know that there are 15,000 units because we're trying to figure out the price per unit, or the cost per unit. So $15,000 divided by 15,000 units, of course, is $1 per unit. So we can go ahead and fill that in here. Our power is also $15,000, and we've already done the math on that, so we know that's $1 per unit. If we go down to maintenance, maintenance is $30,000. And we can divide it by the 15,000 units. So that gives us $2 even per unit. So we can fill that in here. we can add these up, the $5 plus the $1 plus the other dollar plus $2 gives us hang on, I did that wrong. So it's 5 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 is $9. $9 per unit. So we got a total of $9 per unit for a variable cost, variable overhead and cost. We can then do the calculation for 13,000 units. Because we know the cost per unit, we can just simply multiply. So if I have 13,000 units, so let me flip this around and get some room to calculate here. So if we have 13,000 units that we're making, and we know our variable amount per unit is $5, when it comes to indirect labor, I can just multiply that out. 13,000 times the $5 per unit, and that gives us 65,000. Down to the next step, if we have 13,000 units and our indirect materials is $1 per unit, of course that works out to be $13,000. Likewise, the power, same amount, because it's the same amount per unit. And then maintenance, we have 13,000 units, and we multiply it by 2. So if I do that, 13,000 times 2 is, of course, 26,000. And so that gives us a total. We can total it up, 65,000 plus 13,000 plus another 13,000 plus 26,000. This is a total of 117,000 here. Likewise, you do the same calculation for the 17,000 units. So if I have 17,000 units and the variable indirect overhead cost of indirect labor is $5 per unit, I just take the 17,000 and multiply it by $5, and that gives me the 85,000. You would continue the same pattern for the other units, $1, so that'd be 17,000 here, right down the line. And then you would do your calculations this way because your fixed overhead remains the same, hence the idea of it being fixed. It doesn't change. In other words, the amount of overhead that is fixed overhead will not change based upon the number of units. So for example, the depreciation of the building remains the same amount no matter how many units you make, whether you make 0 units or max capacity, your depreciation remains the same. So those will remain the same. You're going to do your calculations this way, and that should show you how to do it. If you have any questions, let me know, or you can put them in the comments.